My name is Odalise Ferreira, and I'm 24 years old. I found out my passport was gone on a Wednesday afternoon in March, 3 days before I'd planned to use it. I'd hidden it inside a hollowed-out hardcover book on the third shelf of our hallway bookcase, wrapped in a plastic sandwich bag to protect it from the humidity in our house outside Tampa. When I reached for it that afternoon, my fingers found only the book's empty carved-out pages and a folded note in handwriting I recognized instantly. "We need to talk about your plans," it said. Nothing else. My stepfather, Ansel Croft, had never once raised his voice at me in the 6 years since he married my mother, and that was precisely what made him terrifying. He didn't need to yell. He simply removed things. My car keys for a week after I mentioned wanting a job outside the house. My phone for 3 days after he saw a message from a friend asking if I was okay lately. Taking my passport wasn't an escalation. It was the same pattern, just aimed at something bigger this time. That I'd been planning this for 4 months by then, ever since a counselor at the community health clinic where I volunteered gently asked me questions that made me realize the way I lived wasn't normal. The curfews, the monitored phone, the fact that I hadn't been allowed to hold a paying job in over 2 years because Ansel insisted my place was helping around the house. I started saving in ways he wouldn't notice, skimming small amounts from grocery change, selling a few pieces of jewelry through a consignment shop across town, tucking cash into a hollowed-out deodorant container I kept in my bathroom drawer. By March, I had just under $2,000, enough for a one-way flight to stay with my biological father's sister in Lisbon, a woman I'd exchanged maybe a dozen emails with over the years, but who had told me, plainly, that I always had a place with her if I ever needed it. I'd memorized flight schedules, timed Ansel's Tuesday golf mornings down to the minute, and mapped out exactly how long it would take me to reach Tampa International from our house. The only thing I hadn't planned for was him finding the passport 3 days early, before I'd even finalized which Tuesday I was leaving that I didn't confront him. I went straight to the county passport acceptance facility instead, shaking through the entire drive, and explained to the clerk that my passport had been lost. She handed me a DS-11 form, the standard application required when applying in person rather than renewing by mail, and asked if I needed expedited service. I said yes before she finished the sentence. Expedited processing, she explained, could take as little as 5 to 7 business days with proof of urgent travel, but I didn't have 5 to 7 days of freedom left to wait quietly in that house. If you're already gripping something waiting to see whether Odalise makes it out, drop a comment telling me if you've ever had to plan an exit down to the minute like she did, because the hardest part wasn't leaving. It was doing it without anyone noticing until it was already done. I paid an additional fee for emergency same-week processing, citing a fabricated but plausible family medical situation abroad, something the clerk didn't question given how common such requests are. 6 days later, a padded envelope arrived at a P.O. box I'd quietly rented under my own name using an old utility bill as proof of address, something Ansel never thought to monitor because he assumed control of my documents was control of me entirely. I booked the flight for the following Tuesday during his golf morning, with $1,840 to my name and a passport he didn't know existed. I made it through security without incident, my hands steady in a way that almost scared me, like my body had simply decided panic wasn't useful anymore. It wasn't until I reached the CBP checkpoint before my international gate that an officer, a broad-shouldered man with a name tag reading D. Marsh, looked at my passport, then at his screen, then back at me for a moment too long. My stomach dropped. I assumed the replacement passport had triggered some kind of automatic flag, that Ansel had somehow reported it stolen, that I was about to be pulled into a back room and sent home before I'd even left the ground. He asked me to step to the side, and I felt the entire month of planning collapse in my chest. But his voice, when he spoke again, wasn't the tone of someone blocking me. It was quiet, careful, almost gentle. "Odalise Ferreira," he said, reading my name off the screen slowly, like he was checking it against something else entirely. "I need you to know you're not in any trouble. But I do need 5 minutes of your time before your flight, and it's important." Officer Marsh led me to a small side office, not a holding room, and explained that he worked with Homeland Security investigations on a task force addressing coercive control and suspected forced marriage cases with Utong ING through the Tampa area, cases that often surface through patterns like unexplained document confiscation, restricted employment, and monitored communication, the exact pattern of my last 2 years, though I'd never once reported any of it to anyone official. He told me my name had entered a watch flag 11 months earlier, not because I'd done anything, but because a mandatory report had been filed by the community clinic counselor I'd spoken to, the one who'd first made me question my situation. That report, he explained, had triggered a quiet, careful investigation, the kind that moves slowly and deliberately, specifically so it doesn't spook a suspected controller into becoming more dangerous before there's enough evidence to act. My name in the system wasn't there to stop me from leaving the country. It was there so that if I ever did try to leave, an officer trained in exactly this kind of case would be alerted to make sure I left safely and to finally get my voice into a case file that, until that moment, had been built entirely around secondhand reports and someone else's suspicions. Officer Marsh asked if I'd be willing to answer some questions, off the record at first, just for the investigations file. No obligation to press charges if I wasn't ready. I said yes before I'd even fully processed the offer. Over the next 40 minutes, I told him everything. The monitored phone, the 2 years without permission to work, the passport hidden and then found, the note left in its place. He told me, carefully, that this pattern matched something the task force had already been circling for months regarding Ansel specifically, not just controlling behavior within our household, but suspected involvement in facilitating similar arrangements for at least 2 other young women connected to him through a religious community group he'd been quietly recruiting from, women whose families had also restricted their documents and movement under the guise of tradition and protection. I hadn't known that. I'd assumed, in the isolated way control makes you assume things, that whatever was happening to me was simply about me, some personal failure that made Ansel feel entitled to control my life. Learning it was part of a documented pattern involving other young women didn't make it hurt less, but it made something else clear. This was never really about keeping me in a marriage-adjacent household out of possessiveness alone. It was about maintaining a system he'd built, and I had simply been the version of it closest to being able to escape and expose it. I gave a full statement that day, delayed my flight by 6 hours with the airline's cooperation once Officer Marsh explained the circumstances, and became, officially, a cooperating witness in an investigation that expanded significantly over the following months. Ansel was arrested 11 weeks later, charged under federal statutes addressing coercive control and document servitude, as they applied to the 2 other young women in his group, my own statement serving as corroborating evidence for a pattern prosecutors said they'd struggled to prove without a first-hand account like mine. I did fly to Lisbon eventually, 3 weeks later than planned, this time with nothing to hide and no note waiting for me in place of anything I owned. My aunt met me at the airport with a handwritten sign that misspelled my last name, and I have never once minded a single letter of it. Somewhere out there, someone else's passport is hidden in a book they haven't checked yet. Comment below if you think they'd recognize themselves in this story, and hit subscribe on Betrayal Chronicles so the next one reaches them too.